America gave the world aviation, Germany gave it the car, Britain gave it the internet, but Georgia's contribution was much more profound and important. You see, Georgia gave the world wine.
საქართველოს მეღვინეობა მევენახეობის ისტორია და მისი შესწავლა მეცნიერულ დონეზე საკმაოდ ღრმა ისტორიას ეთვლის. ხელისგულზე გამოიკვეთა, რომ ის იწყება შულავერის კულტურიდან, რომელიც იყო განფენილი სამხრეთ საქართველოში და საიდანაც ჩვენ გვაქვს პირველი ინფორმაცია მიწათმოქმედების შესახებ და მათ შორის პირველი ინფორმაცია მეღვინეობა მევენახეობის არსებობის შესახებ.
We have a number of vessels that we have sent off for testing for residue analysis, and they have found the chemical markers for wine. That has been done by Patrick McGovern. We have pollen of grape, we have starch from grapevines, and lots of remains of the little flies that are always found flying around vats of wine when you are making it. All these are all found together, and so when you combine this evidence, it really shows us that we have the earliest wine here.
Neolithური ჭურჭელი არის საინტერესო იმ თვალსაზრისით, რომ მაშინ კერამიკა კეთდებოდა ხელით. მიკროსკოპიური ნაშთები ყოველთვის რჩებოდა, იმიტომ რომ არ იყო გლუვი აღმოვაჩინეთ კედლებზე, კერამიკის კედლებზე, სწორედ ღვინის ნაშთი. ეს არის მე-6000 წლეული, ანუ ეს ღვინო იწურებოდა უკვე 8000 წლის წინ.
A wonderful idea that the Georgian government had to put this project together, because it really is multinational, with a lot of different specialists in DNA, botany, archaeology, and really gives a full picture of Georgian wine going right back to the Neolithic period and continuing up to the present. The idea of looking at pottery is that the wine or the liquid gets absorbed into the pottery. So you have the pores of the pottery that absorbs liquid, and what we will see in the laboratory is we take out the ancient organics by using solvents like methanol and chloroform and getting them out of the ancient pottery, and then after we've got a solid material of the ancient organics, we do analyses of that using all different kinds of techniques like liquid chromatography, gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, and so forth.
When it comes to the early Bronze Age with the cooler rocks, it does seem to be an integral part of their culture. The number of small drinking cups that there are, the fact that we're finding wine in graves found buried with the bodies suggests that it has an important symbol, something that they want to take with them into the afterlife, or part of the celebrations that happen with the funerals.
Vastan დამოკიდებულება და ღვინოსთან დამოკიდებულება ჩანს ძალიან ადრეული ეპოქებიდან და ეს ჩანს არქეოლოგიური მონაცემებით. დაკავშირება საკრალთან, რელიგიასთან ეს ხდებოდა ქრისტიანობამდე. ხოლო ქრისტიანობის დროს ეს უკვე ავიდა სულ სხვა საფეხურზე და ღვინო არის უკვე რიტუალის აბსოლუტურად განუყოფელი ნაწილი. ეს ყველაფერი კონტექსტში ერთად არის საქართველოს მონაპოვარი და ძალიან მნიშვნელოვანია, ჩვენ არა გვაქვს მხოლოდ ერთი ეპიზოდი, ჩვენ გვაქვს მთლიანი ევოლუცია.
Georgia is the crossing point between people migrating from east to west, from north to south, like from Siberia to Persia, and from the Roman Empire to China, and in both senses, of course. And so Georgia was in the middle of this traffic, and they accumulated most resources there, and they become
the boss of, the master of viticulture. So Georgia became the main point of concentration of genetic resources.
So we are working in France, but we are very interested in the situation in the South Caucasus because it's considered as a place where grape was first domesticated and where wine production, viticulture started.
I think that really Georgia is all this place where grapes was domesticated. For me, domestication really means the birth of grape cultivation and winemaking. We really believe that grapes comes from Georgia.
The main object of this project were the safeguarding, the conservation and the identification of the native Georgian varieties. The native Georgian varieties are so important not just for Georgia but also for the world viticulture because, as we know, Georgia is a cradle of viticulture. In Western Europe, we started to be viticulturists 5,000 years later. The richness of the variability of the grape selected in Georgia is very high.
We analyzed the data in order to provide information about climate and meteorological data focused on winemaking and grape growing. The most interesting part is that from our analysis we get the idea that Georgia is very similar to very important premium viticultural areas of France and Italy. So the limitations and the resources you have while you grow grape are just the same. So there is really no limitation in the production of grape wines. Since 8,000 years ago, by the analysis we made, the climate was always suitable for grape growing.
Faktურად ის სამეცნიერო მასალა, რომელიც ჩვენ პროექტის ფარგლებში დაგვიგროვდა, არის უთხოვარი დადასტურება იმის, რომ ყველაზე ძველი კვალი ღვინის წარმოები საქართველოს ტერიტორიაზეა მიკვლეული. აქ არის ჩვენება როგორც ჩვენი კულტურული მემკვიდრეობის, ასევე მე ვიტყოდი ჩვენი ინტელექტისაც.
წარმოიდგინეთ, რომ 8000 წელი ერთი და იგივე საქმიანობას მისდევ, თუ ეს საქმიანობა არ ზის შენში, ვერ წაყვები და ვერ გააკეთე. ჩვენ გვაქვს 8000 წლიანი უწყვეტი ტრადიციები ღვინის წარმოების, მაგრამ ჩვენი უნიკალურობა განპირობებულია ამავე დროს ჯიშური მრავალფეროვნებით, ჩვენ 500-ზე მეტი ადგილობრივი აბორიგენული ჯიში გვაქვს და ასევე უნიკალური მეთოდით, ეს არის ღვინის ქვევრში დაყენების ტრადიცია, რომელიც იუნესკოს მიერ აღიარებული იქნა როგორც არამატერიალური კულტურული მემკვიდრეობის ძეგლი. ჩვენ გვაქვს უწყვეტობა, რომ ჩვენ დავიწყეთ ღვინის წარმოება, ვაგრძელებდით და ვაგრძელებთ.
Georgia is the home of the Caucasus Mountains and borders the Black Sea. 75% of the country is mountainous. 40% of Georgia is forested. The forests are known for their biodiversity, which include more than 13,000 species of flora, out of which 380 are endemic to the Caucasus. Georgia is one of the world's richest terrestrial ecosystems, part of the Global 200 Ecoregions network. Georgia includes a wide range of agroecological zones, ranging from semi-desert to subtropical and alpine. There are 14 strict nature reserves, 8 national parks, 12 managed nature reserves, 14 natural monuments and 2 protected landscapes. These are ideal conditions for the production of honey. Acacia, blossom, linden, chestnut, alpine, and the wild honey jara. Beekeeping in Georgia has a long history. Archaeological evidence dates honey to 7,000 years ago, exceeding honey remnants found in Tutankhamun's tomb, dated at approximately 3,500 years. Xenophon, writing in the 4th century BC, tells of the defeat of the Greeks invading the Black Sea coast, using poisoned honey. The healing qualities of Georgian honey is mentioned in texts dating back to the 13th century AD. Georgia is the homeland of the Caucasian grey bee, famous for its long tongue, high resistance, docility, and outstanding ability to obtain nectar. There are few places in the world where wild bees are used by local people to produce honey, and Georgia is one of them. It is called jara. Swarms are collected in hollowed wooden logs, which are placed in remote locations and in trees high up to protect them from bears. This type of beekeeping is very rare and found in remote villages and dwellings in the forests of the subtropical and alpine zones of western Georgia. In the jara hive, the bees are bigger. There is no artificial wax. All the wax is produced by the bees. Jara honey is 100% pure and wild, a distillation of the rugged beauty of Georgia.
Hunger for raw materials in our modern society appears to be insatiable. We dig for mineral resources all over the world, from the Yucatan steppes in the east to the Atacama Desert in the west. Diamonds, copper, oil, salt. A life without mining raw materials is hardly conceivable. And wherever raw materials are discovered, people are magically drawn towards them. Cities appear out of nowhere, become new home for the miners and their families. The village Kasreti, 80 kilometers south of Tbilisi, in the region of Kfemo-Kartli, is no exception. Raw materials are traded worldwide, with prices determined by supply and demand. This sometimes leads to serious consequences for communities and for the mining industry. As an example, the gold price has meanwhile increased by the factor 5 since 2004. A cemetery within the site of the miners' settlement of Kasreti. It appears to be modern, but frequently when new graves are being dug, ceramic fragments, sometimes intact pieces of pottery, or even bones are discovered. For us, the archaeologists from the Georgian National Museum in Tbilisi and the German Mining Museum and Ruhr University in Bochum, these discoveries open a window into the past. The objects discovered are traces from the Kura Araxes culture, whose people lived here more than 5,000 years ago. And another surprise. Just a few meters away, directly on the trail, a stone construction and pottery. The archaeological research began. Laboratory analysis of the bones provided fascinating details. In the following years, scientists of the Georgian-German archaeology team examined the site, which is located on a massive spur covering an area of 60 hectares. Finding the ancient graveyard, we suspected that people may also have settled here. And we were right. Remains of houses, workshops, possible cult sites and ramparts. Between 3,000 and 6,000 years old. In 2015, another surprise. A tomb from the Kura Araxes period, covered with basalt columns and equipped with an access tunnel. Obviously, it has been used several times. The bones of previous occupants were carefully put aside, creating room for new burials. In spite of the many findings, we do not really know much about how the people lived during this period of time. But there is one thing that we know for sure. Those people were miners. Gold miners. Not far from this settlement, the Zagros Hill, the place where the German-Georgian archaeologists' teams began their work in 2004. In Zagros, the gold veins reach clear up to the surface. The ancient miners worked their way down on these veins, sometimes to a depth of 30 meters. In the 1980s, geologists dug a tunnel in order to investigate the gold mine. A stroke of luck. 20 meters below the surface, they discovered an old mine. The shafts were almost completely filled with mining debris, yet they had still survived the ravages of time. Within the layers of debris, we repeatedly found charcoal, a timestamp for archaeologists. Thanks to the radiocarbon method, its exact age can be determined. Eagerly, we await the results. In a tedious work process, we cleared the silted mine. Year for year, deeper and deeper. Young men from the region did most of the hauling work. Some of them were still in their teens. For 9 years, we were privileged to see boys turn into men, and strangers turn into friends. We found pottery, tools made from bone and antlers, and stone hammers, again and again, a total of over 10,000 of them. As with modern hammers, they once had wooden handles, but not anymore. Finally, the result of the charcoal dating. A scientific sensation. The mine is over 5,000 years old, and therewith the oldest gold mine in the world. But how did the people manage to dig this deep into the mountain with such simple tools? What did these tools really look like? How effective were they, and how much gold did the mines yield? So as to better understand the connections, we performed various experiments. Organic material dissolves within a few years, and so only the stone part of the hammer remains. A few such complete tools have survived the millennia in moors or salt mines elsewhere, provide us with reference points for a reconstruction. These early miners discovered a simple principle. Tools had to be harder than the material they were being used on. Alternatively, a fire could be set, making subsequent excavation easier. The amount of wood being used was documented, supplying data for a calculation of the ratio between wood used and the rock material removed. Crushing and grinding of the ore is called preparation. Just like the people of the Kura-Araxes period, we were using stone tools. The grinded ore was washed in an old cistern nearby. The time required was being measured. Another question was, how much actual gold did the ore yield? Measurements with the X-ray fluorescent method provide information. More precise dates came from the laboratory later. We had to take into consideration that the richest ore had probably already been removed by the Kura-Araxes miners. Paravani is about 50 kilometers away. A few years ago, archaeologists found a golden earring with a weight of almost 10 grams. Based on our findings and the experience made during our experiments, we assume that 5,000 years ago, a well-rehearsed team of 8 people mined, processed the gold ore, and made the earring in about a week's time. In order to preserve and protect this unique cultural heritage, in 2006 the Zagros Hill was declared a National Georgian Cultural Monument. 8 years later, in March 2014, this protection was to be finally lifted. On Friday, 12th of December 2014, approval was granted for its removal and the bulldozers moved straight in. We only have sketchy information about the beginnings of mining in Zagros. It all began at some point in time roughly 5,500 years ago. However, we know exactly when it met its end. And with that, one thing became painfully clear. Everything that has a beginning has an end.
Georgia, Eastern Europe. A major discovery shakes up the archaeological world when the bones of 2 apparently giant people are unearthed here. But with the death of the lead researcher, the giant bones go missing. Led by biologist Dr. Irakli Julikidze and archaeological researcher Bruce Fenton, a new expedition is trekking back to where the lost bones are said to have been found.
Well, it's pretty much ancient forest, unspoilt, muddy tracks. We've crossed a couple of rivers over little wood bridges, and now we're on a fairly steep incline upwards.
Did a race of giants once walk tall across this wild landscape? Or is there another explanation for these giant bones? Could they be two people buried long ago who both suffered from the same medical condition, gigantism? Sun Ming Ming is an ex-basketball player. As a result of gigantism, he's 7 foot 8 inches tall.
How are you?
Good, good. How are you?
Good to see you.
Ming had a pituitary tumor that was secreting growth hormone, excess levels of growth hormone. That was his problem.
So could the two sets of bones found in Georgia be the skeletons of two sufferers of this same disease? It's not likely. Gigantism is extremely rare. Only 1 in every 3 million people in the United States have the condition. With this statistical probability to produce two sufferers, the remote wilderness region of Borjomi would need a population of 6 million plus. That's 1 million more than the entire population of Georgia. Perhaps the Georgian giants could have been identical twins, both suffering from the same rare condition.
First, the incidence of identical twins is extremely rare. The incidence, obviously, of gigantism is extremely rare. So now you're putting two things that are extremely rare together. I would say it may not be 0.000, but it's pretty close to that. That's why I'm saying this finding in Georgia is unprecedented. In fact, I've never heard of another such case.
Not that long ago, a farmer claimed that he had stumbled upon an ancient site in the Lesser Caucasus Mountains in Georgia. The farmer said that he had discovered an ancient stone crypt, and he came across two giant human skeletons sitting on chairs around a very large table. Now, throughout the world, there are many locations where it is believed that giants once lived, and Georgia is one of these locations. Now, some of the Georgian researchers heard about this discovery, and they wanted to go see if it was true. So off they went deep into the mountains, hoping that they would be able to find this ancient site. And they did find it. But sadly, the crypt had collapsed, and it was now filled with soil and just tons of debris. Now, these scientists now knew that this farmer was telling the truth. Well, at least in regards to this ancient stone structure. But it did make them wonder, could there actually be giant human skeletons under this debris? So they started to dig. And not too long after these archaeologists started digging, they did find bones, and these bones were huge. So the team took some samples, and they returned to the Georgian capital. And these samples were taken to a very famous and a very well-respected scientist, and I'm sure I'm not going to be able to pronounce his name right, so I'll put it in text. Now, this world-famous scientist said that if these bones were human, these humans must have been at least 9 to 10 feet tall. Now, these archaeologists gave these bones to the scientist so he could examine them. But before he can come to a conclusion, he died, and these bones mysteriously vanished. Now, I have been covering giants for a very long time, and throughout the last 3 centuries, there has been some very credible people claiming that they too had found giant human skeletons. And shortly after these people, or archaeologists, had come forward, these bones in every single case had also mysteriously vanished. And this case in Georgia is one of the most credible cases where giant bones have been found and have mysteriously disappeared. Now, in 2014, the Science Channel stumbled upon this story, and they were just blown away. So they contacted all the people involved with the original dig in hopes of getting to the bottom of this, and in hopes that they could return with them to the site where these giant bones were found. And the Georgian archaeologists agreed, and they all went off back into the mountains. Now, on the way to the site, archaeologist and researcher Bruce Fenton, who accompanied the original team, noticed huge stone blocks, and these enormous blocks seemed to have been part of an ancient building. He also found traces of ancient roads and various other odd structures, making him believe that there might just have been an ancient city here. And due to the fact that these stone blocks were so big, it did make him and the team wonder if this location was at one time inhabited by an ancient race of giants. Now, this ancient site is said to be about 2,000 years old, and I believe they're waiting on permits before they can dig again. So it will be interesting to see if these permits will actually get approved. And if they do, will they find any more evidence of these giants? Now, there are also a lot of legends and stories about giants within this region. When the Greeks arrived in the Caucasus Mountains, they told tales of giants. And one of these legends stated that one of these giants was chained to a mountain because he was being punished for revealing secrets to us humans. And these legends date back to about the exact same time period as this ancient site. Now, Bruce Fenton is also very famous for his work in the jungles of Ecuador, where he and his colleagues unearthed ancient tools that were just too big to be used by humans. And these tools were found right next to a 270-foot pyramid-like structure. And this structure is made out of huge stone blocks. And some of these blocks weigh up to 2 tons, and nobody really knows who made this pyramid.
Сенсационную находку сделали археологи. В горах Боржомского ущелья они обнаружили останки загадочных существ, о которых веками слагали легенды местные жители. Как оказалось, сказки об огромных великанах на самом деле реальность. Какую же тайну хранило это высокогорье, узнал наш корреспондент Михаил Рабакидзе.
Эти кости принадлежат людям-великанам. Жили они 25 тысяч лет назад в горах Боржомского ущелья. Ученые утверждают, что рост человека-гиганта мог составлять от 2,5 до 3 метров. Академик Авесалом Векуа считает, что находка может стать сенсацией, так как в научных кругах давно обсуждается тема, связанная с великанами, населявшими отдельные районы Евразии десятки тысяч лет тому назад.
Обратите внимание на бедренную кость. Она отличается от кости современного человека своей величиной и толщиной. Череп тоже значительно больше. Эти люди жили и развивались обособленно от остальной цивилизации, поэтому и отличались ростом. В научной литературе они упоминаются как великаны. Однако до сегодняшнего дня документальных подтверждений этой гипотезы не существовало. Таким образом, мы стоим на пороге сенсации, но этому будет предшествовать кропотливая работа.
Легенда о великанах в высокогорье Боржомского ущелья передавалась из поколения в поколение. Местные пастухи и охотники утверждают, что их предки рассказывали о сверхсильных гигантах, живших давным-давно в этих горах.
Мой дед рассказывал об этих странных существах, которые раньше здесь обитали. Ему тоже, наверное, об этом поведал кто-то. В горах суровые условия жизни, по сей день нетронутая природа. Наверное, поэтому лишь сверхчеловек мог выжить в те времена.
Группа из 15 человек, в составе которой археологи, палеонтологи и историки, покинула охотничью сторожку и отправилась в экспедицию высоко в горы. Сколько им нужно было идти до долины великанов, точно сказать никто не мог. Впереди их ждали крутые склоны, ледяные горные реки и встречи с лесными хищниками. Единственная женщина, член экспедиции, журналист Лела Нинуа, о проведенной вдали от цивилизации неделе, вспоминает как об экстремальной игре на выживание.
Нам приходилось самим добывать пищу. Это в основном рыба из горных рек. Ведь с собой много продуктов не возьмешь, тяжело. Собирали грибы, по ночам группами дежурили. К нам подкрадывались медведи и волки. Однажды я отстала и потерялась. Не представляете, плакала навзрыд. Меня нашли через полчаса. Оказалось, что прошла целая вечность.
Энтузиазм членов экспедиции был вознагражден. Городище великанов — вот оно. Теперь от подселения странных существ остались каменные тропы и полуразрушенные склепы. Местность усеяна костями. Их подняли на поверхность горные ручьи, которые разливаются весной во время таяния снегов.
То, что мы обнаружили, превзошло все ожидания. Мы сейчас для первичного исследования можем с собой забрать лишь то, что лежит на поверхности. А что находится в этих окаменевших вулканических породах, можно будет узнать в ходе долгосрочной экспедиции. Здесь очень много интересного.
Этот необитаемый горный массив Боржомского ущелья может превратиться в настоящее Эльдорадо для ученых. Теперь точно известно, что долина великанов — это не миф. Очередная, уже более многочисленная и снаряженная экспедиция направится сюда следующим летом. А пока грузинским ученым совместно с их зарубежными коллегами предстоит детально изучить уникальный материал, который удалось обнаружить. Михаил Рабакидзе, Нина Аразашвили, Георгий Базадзе, Первый канал, Боржомское ущелье, Грузия.